ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه. اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to The Struggle Within, a new series on Ahlul Bayt TV, where we are talking about spirituality, perfection, the analysis, rational analysis and arguments for the existence of a creator, and why we should be following Islam. What does Islam have to offer us in this day and age? How can it help us to perfect ourselves? Again, my guest is Sayyid Hassan Sadr, and we're going to continue our discussion. Very interesting point that you made about, this famous personality scientist who wrote the God Delusion, who makes a fundamental error almost right in the beginning of his book. And this is why it is so important for people to read. This is what you often find, that people go through life with certain doubts and they will come to some kind of unhappy conclusion. Often I find the conclusions they come to are an unhappy conclusion. They're not totally satisfied with the point that they've reached, but they think, well, this is the best I can do given what I have. But, there isn't that studying and searching that goes on.
Indeed. No one should be overwhelmed with personalities, with media pressure, with status, education, or someone with such degree said it. No, just take a step back. Remember what I said at the beginning, that all these doubts and misconceptions about the existence of the Creator have actually been answered many centuries ago, and people just rephrase them, or they haven't actually read the conclusions or the answers at the beginning.
And also, of course, sharing knowledge.
Indeed. Indeed. I always encourage people around me to read, but specifically read from those scholars who've studied under Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Divine guidance is there. The Creator, the messengers, and the inheritors of the messengers are Ahlul Bayt, and the scholars who read and studied the works of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. It's there. It's available. You may need to translate it. You may need to sit with a teacher. You may want to do more research into it, but it's there. Reassuringly, it's there. And specifically, the question of the existence of God, it's been answered fully according to rational thinking, what Ahlul Bayt and what Islam encourages us to do. And if I may continue with the further conclusions about the attributes of the Creator, because before the break we discussed causality, how every effect has a cause, and how indefinite regression is false. So far, based on those two basic logical statements, the world must have had a starting point. Now the question now is, what was there before the starting point? People may use different theories, like the Big Bang theory, as the explanation of how the world started. And I just want to remind the viewers that that's not the only theory out there. And I'm not a physicist, but there are specialists out there who have their own questions on this theory. But regardless of how physicists explain the beginning of the existence, the question remains: what was before that first event? Because for every effect there's a cause, and we can't continue backwards in this chain of linked events, dependable events. Again, using rationality, it's very simple, but I just want the viewers just to listen to the words very carefully. The world started at this point. What was before it cannot be a linked or a dependable event. From the existence of the world forward, everything is linked. You know, our planet is linked to the solar system. This galaxy is linked to the rest of the universe. Everything is linked, right? And that's why we've been tracing it backwards. And we said that indefinite regression of dependable events, an event that depends on the one preceding it, must have started somewhere. Now, the world does exist. The first effect could not have come on its own. There must have been a cause before it, because causality states that. So the only possible conclusion is that what preceded our world, what caused our world to exist, cannot be similar to our world. Because our world, each depends on the one preceding it. Each depends on the one preceding it. What existed before our world cannot be similar. It must be that first cause can only be, and I'm trying to be very careful with the language. I'm not saying it's there, I'm saying it can only be there. It must be there. There must have existed something, and at this point I'm referring to it as something. Mm-hmm. Something that does not depend on anything before it. Something.
Yeah.
That is the only conclusion you can make. Something preceded our world, preceded the existence of our world, that is different from our world. The first difference is that it does not depend on anything. It must have been independent. And I want the viewers to just remember this description, because this description of independence is the most vital description of this entity.
Right.
Independent. It cannot depend on anything preceding it. Because if it did, then it's just simply another piece of domino.
Yeah.
You've just shifted the question to this stage. Okay, so what caused this domino piece to fall? You can't keep shifting, because you can't be shifting indefinitely. You must stop, and preceding this, the conclusion must have been an independent entity. Something independent. If this is the first conclusion, which is a must, the second conclusion that stems from it is this independent entity cannot have limits, cannot have borders. It's different to our world. Everything that we see, that we perceive in our world, has limits, has borders. Yeah. Matter, what we perceive, is an entity that has got a three-dimensional, shape, structure. This cup of water, it's got limits. This table, this chair, it's got limits, got borders. This chair depends on its borders to exist. The moment you change the borders, the chair will change. Yeah. The moment you set different limits, different borders, the actual entity changes. And we said this entity that preceded the existence of our world cannot depend on anything. So it can't have limits. So now, within few minutes, we've proven logically, not using the Quran, not using science, that what preceded our world must have been an independent entity that has no borders or limits. And the conclusions will flow very, very swiftly now. Independent, limitless, borderless. It cannot have a shape. This entity caused our world to exist. So it has the ability to create. It's able.
Yeah.
And since it's going to flow very, very quickly now, since we see beautiful design in our world, this entity, which is independent, limitless, able to create, is intelligent. Because it designed our world. knowledgeable, intelligent, and has given life, because we have life. Life is different. I mean, the features of life are clearly described, what's living and what's not living, and then different levels of life, from plants or lower than plants to animals to human beings. So for every effect there must have been a cause. Life within the living beings is a form of effect, is a form of event. It must have stemmed from something. It can't be matter, because matter does not give a life. Matter has to enter into the living being for it to take that different shape or different function or different behavior. So matter cannot give life. Life must have stemmed, like everything else, from this entity. So 5 different descriptions. An entity that is independent, that is cannot have borders or limits, that is able to create, intelligent and knowledgeable, and alive. So from now on, I will stop referring to it as an entity. It's a higher being. It's a higher being who is alive, intelligent, able, with no limits or borders, and he's completely independent. Those 5 conclusions, without opening the Quran, is what rationality leads us to conclude of what must have been there.
Yeah.
Not it is there, it must have been there for our world to come to existence.
Right.
So at school, when kids talk about this, or even adults, and they say, well, who created God then? You need to take a step back. That entity, again referring to entity, cannot depend on anything, because it's not another domino piece. This question is false. When you say who created God, you are assuming that God depends on something.
Yeah, and is limited and
is limited. And if you use rationality, your question becomes false. God, as rationality dictates it, has those features, those attributes, completely independent, cannot have borders or limits, fully able, intelligent and wise, and knowledgeable, and alive. So this, of course, with all due respect to Muslims, some Muslims I should say, and other followers of different faiths, contradicts some of the most basic understandings that some followers of different faiths have about God. Because a lot of faiths and religions describe him with limits.
Yeah.
Limits, even a 3-dimensional shape, body, is a limit. And that rationally cannot happen. Even if you say, well, he chose to manifest himself. That, according to rationality, is impossible. It is impossible for the Creator to set limits for himself, because he cannot have limits.
Right.
The moment you set limits to him, any kind of limits, a shape, a man, animal, object, anything with borders and limits, he becomes dependent on these borders and limits. You can't even ascribe parts to him. And in philosophy, and proud to say that Muslim scholars, followers of Ahlul Bayt, are those who've dissected philosophy to a different level. They say God is simple.
Yeah.
Simple as in he can't be complex, he can't have parts. Because again, he will depend on those parts to exist. So he becomes a dependable form of existence. He's completely independent. And our Imams have clarified when we say it can't happen, this whole question of the egg and the earth, and can God create an egg that can engulf the whole planet within it while keeping both sizes the same, and so similar questions. Such proposals are rationally impossible. So we should not even ask them about God if we're rational people.
Right.
If we're rational people, then we should stick to rationality. Such proposal of a stone big enough that God cannot create it, i.e. setting a limit to himself.
Or a stone that is so... Can God... This is the famous question, isn't it? Can God create a stone that is too heavy for him to pick up?
Indeed. According to rationality, God is limitless.
Yeah.
And a stone will always have limits. Because, there's only one existence that has no limits, which is God.
Yeah.
You can't have any other existence in existence that has limits. That has no limits. God is the only being that has no borders and no limits. So that particular stone must have a limit, must have borders for you to describe it as a stone.
Yes.
Yeah, the stone must have parts, particles, whatever it is. So that stone cannot be limitless. God is limitless. So that question itself is an irrational, and no one should feel the pressure to answer an irrational question. No one should be pushed into a corner of trying to justify a proposal which is irrational.
Yeah.
We're rational people, and we're confident of our not just Muslims, but people. People are rational.
Yeah.
Or they should be. And if you follow this path, you reach certainties. These proposals are just throwing doubts, trying to push into rationality or conclusions that may contradict rationality.
Yeah.
We should not be subjected to that. We should just adhere to the certainty. And I hope that the viewers appreciate how straightforward this was before even opening the Quran.
Yeah.
And what Muslims should be proud of is that once they open the Quran at this stage, they will find these descriptions. And I'm going to stop at those 5. But you can make a bit more. But let's just stop, because that's all we need to define God. Those conclusions are there in the Quran. And probably the Quran is the only book that has stayed pure enough as a divine guidance to contain all these descriptions together.
I was going to say a couple of points. Is number one, I have heard Hindus say, like exactly you were saying, that they argue that God is able to make himself into any form that he wishes, and hence they have 133 million deities because this isn't difficult for God. That's that argument there. And the other point I was going to make is this issue of can or cannot. So when we're saying that God cannot do that, it's not saying that God is therefore not all-powerful.
Indeed.
That what it is saying is that
thank you for that clarification.
The cannot comes from
the proposal.
Yeah, from the fact that it doesn't adhere to logic and rationality.
Indeed.
It's got nothing to do with his power.
Thank you very much for that clarification. It's the limitation of the language, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we say it can't happen, we're not talking about God's abilities. You're absolutely right. The proposal, and I kept referring to it as a proposal. I'm trying to be very careful with my language.
Yeah.
Because it's not even a thing. That rock, that stone that is heavier than God is not actually a thing. It's a proposal. It's a proposed idea.
Yeah.
And when we talk about rationality, if we all agree as humans to follow rationality, to use it, then let's stick to it. If you have scriptures based on personal experiences, then we have 2 different methods here. Now, I chose rationality to start with because it's a common language that everyone understands. If you have a different, then it's a different discussion.
Yeah.
I would encourage people never to compromise rationality with scriptures or personal experiences. And with all due respect to followers of different religions, when you say God chooses to set himself into a particular form, that is rationally unacceptable.
Right.
Rationally unacceptable. That object, animal, non-living object, human being that you are proposing to be God in a particular form cannot exist.
Right.
Cannot rationally exist. That object is a proposed idea. It cannot happen. So you imagine it, you may ascribe a certain description of it. Reality is, rationality, it cannot happen. So thank you for that clarification. And the Imams have used this language, not a limitation of the Creator. It's a limitation of this object, this proposal, this idea. That idea, that thought, that stone, that animal, that human being, there's a limit to it. It cannot exist in rationality. Hence, the question, the question is void, so we don't need an answer.
Right.
So that's what I would like the viewers to pick on, that we are not obliged to answer that question because it contradicts rationality.
Yeah.
And we were very careful in our initial steps that we said we're going to use rationality and stick with rationality. If you want to change direction halfway through, that's what we say. If you don't adhere to Ahlul Bayt all the way, there will come a moment that you will diverge. And the conclusion you will reach will not be 100% accurate. This is the arc of salvation.
Yeah.
This is the straight path. This is a Siratul Mustaqim. That if you adhere to it, it will take you all the way to the depth, to the height, to the firm certainties. If you follow it in the first few steps and then use something else, if you follow Islam, but when it comes to Ahlul Bayt and the details, you follow something else, it will lead you somewhere else.
Yeah.
It applies to Muslims, it applies to non-Muslims. So adhere to the straight path, adhere to the arc of salvation, and your conclusions would continue to be accurate and rational.
Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion, and again, very helpful to many of our viewers as well. We've just come to the end of the program, so I hope you enjoyed it. Do keep watching, and this is a series that will be loaded up on YouTube, inshallah, so you can access any of the shows that you may have missed, and we look